Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and alongside me once again is Steven Railston. Steve, how are we doing?
Back in the recording studio, as you can see with my background. It's very eccentric. It's worth checking out on YouTube if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, because it is very bizarre. But yes, very well, George. Very well. How are you?
Not bad. Apart from still coughing away, so I'll do my best to mute my microphone as the coughs arrive. But we'll try and soldier on best we can. But before we dive into today's podcast, of course, we need to offer a shout out to our new podcast sponsor, Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN that is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use our code Manchester at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. So for more information, please go to our description box underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube. So with the formalities out of the way, myself and Stephen have decided we're going to do something a little bit different today than what we've done in the last couple of weeks or so. We're in that lull at the minute with not a lot happening. The transfer window is temporarily closed, and we didn't think you'd want to listen to us two ramble on about a shirt for 40 minutes. So we're going to do something a little bit different this time. Me and Stephen have decided we're going to have a little look back on Erik ten Hag's signings from what he made during his time as United boss. And we're going to give each of them a school-type grading. So like A to D, might be an A-star in there, we'll see. So without further ado, Stephen, 21 signings Erik ten Hag made in total during his time at the club, 15 on permanent deals, 6 on temporary loans. Wide variation in the recruitment. Fair few of them, to be fair, though, from Holland with those Eredivisie connections. And it all began with a player from the Netherlands, of course, back in July 2022. Feels such a long time ago now. Tyrone Marshall, the first man through the door of that new era that commenced that summer. And it's fair to say that one's not aged particularly well.
I think Malacia was exactly what he was on the tin, really, a backup fullback from the Eredivisie. Some mixed performances, of course. He actually made quite a strong start to his time at the club, and he started over Luke Shaw, and then he got hooked in successive appearances at half time. And from that point, I don't think he ever really recovered. Obviously had a knee injury at the end of that first season and then went missing because he needed surgery, had another round of surgery. And he's looked rubbish since coming back. Let's just be honest about that. Obviously signed for Feyenoord in London in the January window. I'm going to have to give him a D. I can't even give him a C, George. What rate would you give him?
I think you've got to be looking at a D, haven't you? I thought, to be fair, when I first saw him, it was the Liverpool game when United won 2-1 that night, Ten Hag's first win. I thought, yeah, they've uncovered quite a promising player here. But it didn't last. And like you said, it was what it said on the tin, back up, left back. And now the fact United play with wing backs, Amorim gave him a go, quite clear. He doesn't suit that profile player. And he's obviously one they do want to get out the door this summer. So I think a D is a fair grading for him, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and he hasn't really featured much for Feyenoord either, which probably tells you all you need to know about his level and where he's at. He's definitely not United level, and he'll be sold this summer on a permanent transfer.
Yeah, he will be. But another guy that arrived from the Netherlands that summer went by the name of Lisandro Martinez. He arrived from Ajax. Another one that has struggled with injuries quite a bit during his time at United, but when he's been fit, he's been pretty good, particularly in his first season. Once he got going, overcame the criticism of Jamie Carragher saying he's a bit too small. We saw a player in there, and if he can stay fit, I still think he's got a future at Old Trafford under Ruben Amorim myself.
His first season was tremendous. He was outstanding, and it was easy to see why he became so popular with supporters. A real crowd favourite. Plays with that aggression, left-footed centre half, so he's so important for the kind of releasing them forward and playing through the lines with his passing. And he really has a unique profile in that sense in that squad. Well, until recently now, Aidan Heaven's been signed. In terms of grading, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as you said, he's had multiple muscle and injuries and different kind of things. His metatarsal as well. He obviously pulled up, didn't he, with his knee in February against West Ham. So he's probably going to come back around August time or maybe September from that injury. So if you actually look back at his last 2 years, he's missed huge chunks of time on the pitch. I feel C might be a bit harsh. So I'll probably have to go B- for Martinez, purely because of his injuries. We all know what he can do when he's fit, and he's obviously a fantastic player. But those injuries, there's been a lot of them. So you could easily mark them as a C, I believe.
Yeah, I think B- hovering a C is probably about fair for him because the reasons you've outlined there, yeah, been a lot of injuries, but when he's fit, and particularly in that first season, he was exceptional. It's that ball playing ability that he's got, and Me and Samuel were discussing it on a podcast a few weeks ago, and it looked as though Bruno Fernandes potentially could be on his way to Saudi Arabia, and we had a brief discussion about who could be United's next captain. And he was a shout I went with, but was a little bit hesitant based on his injury record that if you want a captain, you need him there. But mentality-wise, he'd probably be a good fit for that. So I still think if he can stay fit, there's a role for him under Amorim. But like you said, Aidan Heaven's presence he's created some competition at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, we even talked about Lenny Yora, didn't we? Was it 2 weeks ago? Who's obviously kind of made that left side centre-half position in the back three his own at the end of the season. So it'll be really interesting to see if Martinez gets back into the team straight away. Of course, naturally, when a player comes back from such a serious knee injury, he's not going to be starting every week. But when he's fully up to speed and he's fit again at 100%, there'll be a choice there to make, of course, if everyone's fit and available, which usually isn't the case. But yeah, I definitely have Yora above him at the moment in that left-sided role.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. There's some good, healthy competition there. But going back to the summer of 2022, Stephen, Christian Eriksen was another early signing that was made that summer. And again, similar to Martinez, had a really big impact in that first season, but has tailed off in the last two seasons, will obviously be released later this month, the end of June. But first season, he was excellent, struck up a brilliant combination with Casemiro in midfield. United eventually tried to ease him out of the first 11 with Mason Mount coming in the following summer. But I think I'd be hovering somewhere around a C for Christian Eriksen, personally.
Yeah, I mean, those first 6 months were wonderful. He obviously had a really strong understanding with Bruno Fernandes and Casemiro, as you said. So that midfield trio were really key to Ten Hag's success in that first season. I've always been a really big fan of Eriksen. I just think he's a wonderful football player. Technically, he's outstanding. I think he'd have to be among the best on that training ground. His ability with the ball at his feet, how he can pick a pass, a real technical, wonderful kind of magician kind of player. But he was at the end of his career, wasn't he? In the autumn of his career during his time at United, the best of him was seen at Tottenham. Yeah, C is probably the correct grade. If I've given Martinez a B minus, I think C is probably the correct grade for Eriksen, who again he did contribute during his final season, but it was the right decision to move him on. And the level he goes to will be below United. Now he finds a new club for next season.
Yeah, definitely. There's still a player in there, but like you say, he's going to have to not be at a club where the demands and expectations are as
He's
high
had a
as they
fantastic
are.
career, hasn't he? Especially considering
yeah.
Obviously having the cardiac arrest at the Euros. So he did tremendously well to recover from that. And he's been really fantastic really in the Premier League for a long period of time. So he'll look back on that and be proud of it.
Yeah, he was exceptional at Tottenham, wasn't he, for many years? And like you said, with what happened at the Euros, he's incredibly fortunate that he's able to play football at any level. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens to him over the course of the summer. He'll not be short of options. There's no doubt about that. Casemiro, we've already mentioned him. He came in that summer as well after what felt like a never-ending pursuit of Frenkie de Jong. United changed course, went for a defensive midfielder, which we all felt they needed at the time. And like Christian Eriksen, absolutely superb in that first season. Felt as though he'd solved all of United's midfield woes. But in the back of our minds, we all knew deep down it wasn't a long-term fix.
And then the difference is Casemiro is on mouth-watering wages and he was signed for a mouth-watering fee and given a 5-year contract, wasn't it? Casemiro's first year was, again, tremendous. He was pivotal in finishing third and winning the Carabao Cup, of course. But, I mean, the last 2 years have just been shocking, haven't they? There's been a huge regression. There was improvement this season in the Europa League, and he looked way more comfortable against continental opposition. Playing against Spanish sides, I think, really helped them, and it suits where he's at his career at this current point. But he'd have to be a C. You could definitely mark him as a D, couldn't you, because of the regression and for the money that he was signed for and for the wages that he's received. But because of that first season, I think I'd have to go C, yeah.
Yeah, I think a C is fair because I think obviously we're making these gradings with sort of the most recent season at the forefront of our minds, but we can't ignore what they've done previously. And Casemiro, like you said, first season, he was very, very good. Now we move on to arguably the most controversial signing of Erik ten Hag's entire reign, a certain Brazilian winger who goes by the name of Antony, which felt like the final piece of the jigsaw that summer arrived for huge, astronomical money from Ajax. And Stephen, I think it's fair to say this could go down as one of the Premier League's worst ever transfers.
Well, we said A to D, didn't we? Can I give this an F? Can I give Antony an F?
If you like.
Can I break the grading system? Yeah, shocking signing. Unfortunately, never saw the Antony that played in the Netherlands and the form that he showed over there for Ajax, because he actually looked like quite a promising emerging talent. He's obviously recaptured that form at Real Betis and he looks a different player. but I just don't think he's got the attributes to succeed in the Premier League. His style, how he plays, and he's a bit of a one-trick pony, isn't he? Cutting in on the inside on that left foot. So yeah, a really, really, really bad signing. And you're right, for me, arguably one of the worst signings in Premier League history, considering the money he was bought for.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's the pound for pound. When you're looking at what you've received, it has been a disaster. And obviously, he went on loan to Real Betis last season. Did really well, to be fair to him. He's created a market for himself. Remains to be seen who will take a punt on him this summer. United want to get him off the books and moving on permanently. But last but not least, for the summer of 2022, Martin Dubravka. Almost forget about him, arriving on loan from Newcastle United. Only spent half the season there in the end. Did a job when he was asked to about 3 or 4 appearances.
It's a day. Move on with Dubravka. Yeah, 2 appearances in the Carabao Cup. I think he was poor in those appearances. And as you said, he was recalled after 6 months. So some of these we could definitely be quicker than others.
We certainly can. And that takes us on to January 2023. So the first mid-season window that Ten Hag oversaw. 3 new additions, all on loan. Another goalkeeper in Jack Butland, who we never saw. So I don't think we can even offer him a rating. It's kind of null and void for that one. Then we move on to Wout Weghorst, which was one of the most interesting signings of Erik Ten Hag's reign, without a doubt. United went into that window desperate for a striker. I don't think any of us at the beginning of that window would have selected Wout Weghorst. Now, he was on loan at Wolfsburg, I think it was at the time, and then taken from Burnley. Interesting one, Stephen, to say the least.
That's one way to describe it. I'm actually going to give him a C. I'm not actually going to give Weghorst a D, purely because he could be effective in certain games and a certain set of circumstances. At least he had presence, and at least he put himself about. I know that's the bare minimum for a striker. But yeah, he was well below the level, wasn't he? He just wasn't a goal scorer. And look, that problem still hasn't been addressed, unfortunately, 2 years on.
Yeah, it was never going to be obviously a long-term fix, but even as a short-term fix, it was one of those where you sort of looked at it and you thought, what are they doing here?
Are you a D for Weghorst? Are you going to give him a D?
I mean, to end of the day, as we said on the podcast on Tuesday, when we were discussing about strikers being judged on goals, he got 2 in 31 games. You've got to give him a D. I'm in favour of that.
A C's generous for Weghorst, but I'll be controversial. I'll stick by my grading.
We'll go 50-50 on that one then. And then last but not least, for January 2023, Marcel Sabitzer was an emergency loan signing after Christian Eriksen got injured. They left this one very late in the day to get done. They weren't originally planning to strengthen in midfield. And to be fair, I thought Marcel Sabitzer did okay. I remember watching him in the first leg of the Europa League quarterfinal against Sevilla when he scored twice at Old Trafford, making some good sort of box crashing runs, could control the ball quite well. And to be fair, I thought he did all right, the bits that we saw of Marcel Sabitzer.
I thought he was really effective. It's that kind of player where he was a goal scorer midfielder and he could contribute. I actually quite liked him during his loan spell. I'd give him a B, I think. He's obviously at Dortmund now and he's doing quite well. There was talk about whether maybe United would sign him permanently. That didn't come around. But when you look at the loan signings that they've made, he'd definitely be at the top of that list, 100%, because he did his job. And as you say, that performance in the Europa League against Sevilla, I remember tweeting after that game saying, write the numbers down on the paper, get the contract out, sign it. A few people didn't understand the reference. But yeah, I thought that was one of the better loan moves, definitely. I'll give Sabitzer a B.
Yeah, you went into full Rio Ferdinand mode for that one. Yeah, 3 goals in 18 games he got. It's not the worst return for a player that obviously had never played in England before, wasn't expected to make the move. And in instances, he was quite effective. So I think
they got that deal done very quickly as well.
They did. Sure it was literally, the last 12 hours of the window? I seem to remember writing about it that lunchtime that something was brewing. It was very late on in the day. But summer 2023, we now move on to, which was pretty busy. Mason Mount was arguably the headline signing until Rasmus Højlund came along. We'll talk about him in a little while. But Mason Mount, first of all, it was 55 million pounds, rising, I think, to 60 at the beginning of the deal. For a player that had 12 months left on his Chelsea contract, it was a questionable one. United identified him with a view to essentially adding more energy and youthfulness to their midfield in an upgrade on Christian Eriksen to play as a number 8. Mount admitted that he preferred playing as a number 8 opposed to a 10. Unfortunately for him, injuries have just absolutely ravaged his United career so far.
I don't think it was ever going to work playing him as a number 8, to be honest. Playing him in that kind of role, although you'd think he does have the kind of qualities for it, he's definitely better higher up the pitch, and we've seen that with Ruben Amorim. You could definitely make a case for a D if you were being harsh, but I'd have to give him out a C, purely because I retain hope that he could become a good signing. I think Samuel actually phrased that as that he could accidentally become a good signing, and it's true. But look, this season should have been make or break for Mount. There was a lot of injuries again. So I'll kick the can down the road, give him another chance for next year, and probably assess him more after those 12 months. But I'd give him out to C, I think.
Yeah, there's been instances where you've looked at him and thought he could contribute something to this team. And I think that the important thing with Mason Mount is it shouldn't be forgotten what he'd achieved before coming to United. He'd obviously won the European Cup with Chelsea. He'd helped England get to a Euros final. He'd played in big matches and contributed in those. And you looked at him and you sort of thought, yeah, this could be a smart signing, but maybe just the timing was wrong. And obviously his injury record hasn't helped him at all. But continuing the trend of 2023, Andre Onana was the next man through the door. David De Gea's successor. Obviously, United originally were prepared to give De Gea a new deal and keep him. Then a few errors towards the end of that season resulted in them letting him go. Onana was Ten Hag's top choice. He'd worked with him at Ajax, ball-playing credentials. Personally, I'm still waiting to see those ball-playing credentials that we were sold and talked about. He's obviously had no shortage of errors in his game. Still think there's a good keeper in there somewhere, but I feel for me, third season coming up for him next season, it's make or break for him to be United's number one.
Well, I think if I had this conversation in November, so just before December when he played against Arsenal, where it all started to kind of fall apart, I would have actually given Onana a B because I thought he was on a real upward curve and I thought he was improving. I thought he'd eradicated kind of those mistakes and blunders out of his game. And then he's just regressed hugely again in the last 6 months or so. And obviously all started at the Emirates when he those corners and he was getting kind of hammered in around his own 6-yard box. His mistake against Nottingham Forest. But do you remember there's double saves, for example, at Crystal Palace away at Selhurst Park and then in the Europa League as well. So he can perform well. We know that. But he's just so inconsistent. And when you've got a goalkeeper who throws in a mistake like that every now and then, you just can't trust him, can you? And you need to trust your goalkeeper. It's one of the most important positions on the pitch. So for that reason, it would have to be a C for Onana.
Can be quite erratic as well, can't he?
Hugely
You never
erratic.
quite know what you're going to get. And that's the thing. When United bought him, we were all sold this vision how he was going to help progress the play from the back and be this ball-playing goalkeeper that we saw in the Champions League final with Inter Milan against City. But we've never really seen evidence of that with the way United collectively have obviously regressed since he came in.
I think it's partly on him, the distribution issue, and partly on the team, because you look at the way Inter Milan kind of built up that season to get to the Champions League final against Manchester City, and Onana's distribution was so influential. It was fantastic. Everyone's seen that kind of the highlight clip of that game. We've all watched it live, but that's done the rounds of Onana's passing and just picking players out 50 yards, 40 yards, whatever he wants. But you're right, we've not seen that, unfortunately. I think it's partly, as I said, on the way United play and partly on him, because sometimes you watch him and he just makes silly decisions, very silly decisions, with the ball at his feet and with the ball at his hands, I suppose.
Well, there was another 2 recruits who came in from Italy that summer alongside Andre Onana. Rasmus Højlund, the most expensive addition of that summer, £64 million, rising to 72 million. And I think if we were having this conversation this time last year, Stephen, we'd have probably been reasonably generous with our grading after 16 goals in his first season in England, where realistically he shouldn't have been signed to be United's first choice striker. He should have been second choice, looking up to somebody more experienced, but he immediately had to shoulder the burden. 16 goals, pretty respectable, healthy return. This season, 10 goals, only 4 in the Premier League, and it's quite clear that he cannot be United's starting striker next season.
You're right. If I had this conversation, I would at the end of his first season, I would have given Højlund a B+, I think, because it's an incredibly respectable first year at the club. It's not easy to come in from the Serie A at 21 years old and kind of score 14 goals in all competitions, 16, and obviously look very good. So yeah, to regress in the manner that he has is incredibly disappointing, and he's looked a shadow of himself in that kind of first year, took huge backward steps. And you're right, they need a new striker. He needs to be replaced. Having said that, I won't completely give up on him. You don't suddenly become a bad player in one season. I'm going to allow him one bad season. And I think if United sign a proven centre forward and go into next season with that player, and Højlund competes and has that player ahead of him, I think we should see better performances. And if he can get back to that level where he scores around 16, 17 goals, he'll certainly be back on the right track again. So it has been incredibly frustrating, and a lot of people have written him off. But I think it would be a bit daft to completely write him off if you get what I'm saying. He's still very young, and he's had a difficult task of leading the attack at such a young age.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? He's only 22. He came in, as I said a minute ago, of being the starting striker, being the main man. And ultimately, this season, once it became apparent that Joshua Zirkzee was not a number 9 and was much more effective as a 10 in Amorim's system, he was starting by default, wasn't he? He was the automatic starter because there was nobody else. I know Chido Obi's come on in leaps and bounds, but he's not ready yet to be the main man for Man United at his age. So that competition, if they get that proven goal scorer they so desperately need, it could help United as a team and it could help him individually. But obviously at this point, there are no guarantees Rasmus Højlund will be staying.
Yeah, completely. And I think one of the concerning things with Højlund is when you actually watch Obi, who is 17 years old, he's only made a few senior appearances. When he comes onto the pitch, his movement and his innate kind of natural instincts are so much better than Højlund's, and that is really concerning. Højlund's movement in the box is quite poor, and I don't think he gets himself in good positions a lot of the time. So it really doesn't help himself in that sense. And it's pretty bad. Obi's performances have kind of done him no favours. Even coming on the post-season friendly, and you don't want to be too harsh to Højlund because it's the end of the season and post-season friendlies don't really matter. But Obi did a lot more than Højlund in those 45 minutes. And you can tell Obi's got those natural, deadly kind of striker instincts. And does Højlund? I'm not so sure. And you can spend hours, I said this on the podcast every week, you can spend hours on the training ground, hours doing drills and working with a coach. But sometimes it boils down to having those natural instincts. And yeah, whether Højlund has them, I'm not so sure, which is obviously a concern.
Yeah, it's that guile, isn't it? And that anticipation of where to be. And box movement has been something that Højlund has been criticised for quite a bit, certainly this season. So are we settling on a C/D for Rasmus Højlund then?
I don't think did we say a grade? We just waffled on there. Yeah, I'd go for a C for Højlund. Yeah,
go for a C. I think that's fair. Altay Bayındır was another addition in the summer of 2023. Very late on, came in to be United's second choice goalkeeper and provide support and competition for Andre Onana. I think with the exception of his heroics at the Emirates Stadium in the FA Cup in January, it's been one of those signings that just simply hasn't worked out well for anybody.
You could see as a C or a D, but I'm probably just going to be a bit harsh and say he's a D, to be honest. I think he's so inconvincing when you watch him. And that's why you'd love to be able to replace Onana in the starting team, but the alternative was Bayındır. You're right. He delivered a superb performance against Arsenal in the FA Cup. A heroic display, really, some fantastic saves. But apart from that, he's been really poor. And he's below level required. So I'm going to have to give Bayındır a D.
Yeah, he's another one that will probably be on his way this summer, I would have thought, with the fact that United are looking to tie Tom Heaton down to another year. You can't imagine that they're going to demote him to being fourth choice and then bringing someone else in to be second and Bayındır going to third. So I'd imagine he'll be on his way this summer. The last permanent signing that summer, Stephen, was Johnny Evans, which was very left field. He came back to United in the summer, basically just to train, to maintain his fitness. And United said, well, we'll add you permanently. We gave you a 1-year deal. Played a hell of a lot more in that first season than he possibly could have imagined. I think it was 30 games he played in the end. And yeah, he did all right. I'll always remember the fabulous pass he played for Bruno Fernandes away at Burnley at Turf Moor. And he just added a little bit of experience to the camp, to the team. And like you said, for others, did what he said on the tin, really.
Well, I'm going to give him an A, George. I'm going to give Johnny Evans an A. Ooh. I am. He's surprised at that.
I am.
But it's funny because it was an accident. It was an accidental signing. He's obviously came in the train after speaking to Darren Fletcher, his old mate, and he comes into the club and then he signed on a short-term contract. He was fantastic in that kind of first year. He did his job. He came in and he was always reliable when he played. His second year at the club, there's been a lot of injuries, so maybe an A is a bit controversial because he hasn't actually been available for most of the time. But it's been quite a romantic tale, hasn't it? Coming back and enjoying that second stint and look at haven't been the best seasons, but he won the FA Cup, and I think that was a fantastic experience to him. I spoke to Corey Evans' brother a few months back and interviewed him about Ahmad, and it sounded like it was a wonderful day out for their family. So yeah, maybe some sentimental reasons, but I'll give Johnny Evans an A for his second stint.
I'll let you have that. Unexpected, but I'll let you have it anyway. But there was 2 other additions that summer, 2 loan signings. The first was Sofian Amrabat. Came in to seemingly plug this midfield gap and provide some competition for Casemiro. Started very slowly, and for quite a long time of that loan spell, struggled to get into the team. When he did play, we often said, what was all the fuss about? By the end of it, we were debating whether they should sign him permanently. So it was a bit of a weird one, Sophie Amrabat's loan. We saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of him.
That's a very good way to put it. And he was signed for 8.5 million, by the way, that loan fee. So he certainly didn't come cheaply. I think you just have to assess him on the last memory of him. And that was in the FA Cup final against Manchester City.
But he was exceptional.
And he was outstanding. Yeah, he was brilliant. But you're right, he had such a slow start. He looked way off it, especially for the money they paid for that loan. But at the end of the day, he played such a pivotal role in that stunning victory against City at Wembley. So for that reason, I'll give him a B. But yeah, he would have been way lower than that hadn't he ended the season in such a strong manner.
So we've got an A and a B from the crop of 2023. What score is the last man going to get? Probably a forgotten man for many at this point. Sergio Reguilon arrived on loan from Spurs. Again, another emergency loan signing. Again, Stephen, not one that I don't think anybody will remember with a great amount of fondness, that one.
No, he's getting a D for me. And I probably don't need to say much more. I'll tell a story when we were at Brentford. Was it last season? Yeah, it was when Mason Mount scored at the G-Tech. So, and obviously United thought they'd snatched the game away from Brentford, and Brentford went back up the pitch and scored to make it 1-1. Reguilon was a Brentford at that point, and he was sticking around at the end of the game. And he came out with all his Man United goodie bag stuff, and someone remarked, like a member of staff, and said, wasn't he only at United for a few months? He seemed to have this weird affinity with United, considering he was only there for a few minutes. But yeah, I'd say D for Reguilon.
Yeah, and to be quite honest, I can't really remember what he did. So that probably summarises how his loan spell went. Well, the January window in 2024 was non-existent. Nothing happened. Nobody came in. So we'll jump to this last summer, which was Ten Hag's final window in charge. 5 new recruits, all permanent signings, the first of which was Joshua Zirkzee. Again, another one with Dutch links, signed though from Bologna in Italy. Started very well for him. Debut goal on the opening night of the Premier League season against Fulham. We all thought, they've found somebody here who's going to add goals. It soon became apparent that he wasn't a striker. He obviously continued to play. Performances weren't convincing. Got better once he reverted to a number 10 role under Amorim. But generally speaking, probably one of those where United fans would not be bothered if he left this summer. But one or two might think, yeah, as a 10, he probably could do a job and provide some competition.
It's not going to be a D, is it? And it's not going to be an A. A B would probably be generous.
I think C's fair and nice round figure.
But I'm feeling like I'm in a generous mood, George. I feel like I'm going to give him a B-. If on the condition that you're judging him as a number 10 and not a striker, because of course he's not a goal scorer and he's not a striker, and he was signed to be a striker. He clearly isn't, and he does not have those kind of natural instincts that we were just discussing there of Obi and Højlund. But there was clear promise as a number 10, and he did add something. And I think in build-up play, he shows a lot of promise as well, and a lot of skill actually. So if he could have a settled role in the number 10 role, and he didn't cost a lot of money, do you know what I mean? It wasn't a hugely expensive signing. So yeah, maybe B- is a bit generous, but I'll stick with it. Again, a bit controversial, gets people talking.
Well, you'll be the one taking the pelters later, not me. So I'm fine with that.
So yeah, you'd be a C for Xerxes, wouldn't you? Yeah, I mean, I think objectively a C is probably the fairest, but I'll go.
No,
with
I've got to take your first answer. I'm afraid. B-.
Backing out of it already.
The second edition that summer was Lenny Yoro, which was arguably the standout signing of the summer on paper. Real Madrid wanted him, so it was quite obvious that United were on the brink here of signing a really promising young centre-half. Got injured in the first game of pre-season. We didn't see him again until December. Was in and out of the team until sort of late March, early April time. But the last few games was probably the first game on the team sheet. We've discussed it already about how he was really, really promising on the left. We all expected him to be Amorim's first choice right-sided centre-half in the back three. But I think looking at Lenny Yoro going into pre-season in a few weeks' time, genuinely, we don't know what his best position could be because he's so good in either role.
Yeah, it took a while to see him, of course, because he fractured his metatarsal against Arsenal in pre-season. But a really good last 6 months from around December time through to the end of the season. And he just grew in confidence, I think, with every month towards the end of the campaign. You could really tell that he was developing and looking more comfortable and composed, and delivered a string of really good performances. Is he a bit generous? I've kind of messed around with these gradings now because I've been generous with a few players. I'll have to give him a B plus. I think it would maybe be a bit too far, but yeah, really good start from Yoro, and it'll be interesting to see how he performs in his full season. I just want him to avoid injury, and as I've said, I think that left-sided position on the back three could really be his, and he could really excel in that role.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's got enormous potential. I think he's very, very, very good on the ball, got a good reading of the game as well. So I think there's definitely a very exciting prospect in there. And you look at United's pool of centre halves and you think this summer, they don't need to do anything there. They've got Aidan Heaven, who arrived in January for a bargain fee, looks absolutely outstanding, not put a foot wrong yet. De Ligt's still there, Maguire, Martinez once he's back fit. There's a lot of options there. And Ruben Amorim, realistically speaking, he could find it very tough to select his first choice back three, and pre-season performances could dictate his thinking on this one.
Well, for me, it would probably be Maguire, De Ligt, and Yoro as things stand. But then again, you look at that back three and you think, is that good enough to challenge the top six, to really be in the top four? On the best day, I'd say it is. But you'd have to obviously have the wing back positions right, and in the midfield ahead of them right as well. So I guess it depends on who is signed around those players, but it will be an area that needs to be addressed eventually. Of course, Maguire's going into the final year of his contract as well. The 1 year extension was triggered in December, January time. So he's coming into the final year of his deal now, end of June time. So it'll be one, maybe not a centre half this summer, but yeah, you're right, maybe next summer.
Yeah, good options though, nevertheless. And one of them that you just mentioned there, Stephen, Matthijs de Ligt, he came in from Bayern Munich. Again, another one that Ten Hag knew from his time at Ajax with him. Dutch connections, obviously. Again, another one that I feel like we've seen the best and the worst of. He's had some good performances, some poor performances. And again, if it was me, I'd be looking around a C, just sort of middle of the road, done all right.
See, maybe I am very generous because I'd give De Ligt a B. I think obviously a real mixed bag. You're right, a real mixed bag of performances. Some very good performances, and then some performances where you think, I'm not so sure about that. And that's the reason why Bayern Munich and Juventus sold him, and why he was available for so cheap. But I actually think he's been pretty good. I think me and Ty agreed on that on one of the midweek debates where we used the words pretty good. Pretty respectable first year. So I'd have to give him a B.
Yeah, he's done all right. There's certainly not been any performances where I've looked at it and thought, wow, that was terrible. But there's not been many where I've looked at it and thought, wow, he was outstanding this afternoon, for example. He's just done a solid job, so to speak. Obviously, Nusa Mazraoui arrived alongside him. It was confirmed the same evening. Probably the best signing, pound for pound signing that United made under Ten Hag, I thought. I thought he had a really, really good first season at United. Played right back, centre back, left wing back, right wing back, centre attacking midfield, bizarrely against Fenerbahce that evening in the Europa League, and just been a really, really solid addition. Nusa Mazraoui been superb for me for, what was it, 12 million pounds, something like that. Very, very cheap. Done an excellent job.
It's rare you get a player for that kind of value in the market these days. I'd have to give him an A for that because of the fee he was signed for, because he's so reliable. Yeah, you're right. Six different positions, which is remarkable, and he's always almost been available. It's funny though. It's a funny quirk because if you look at your strongest team next season, you probably wouldn't have him in your strongest side. But he's a fantastic squad player to have. And again, just a brilliant first season at club, over 60 appearances, which is amazing to reach in your first year. So fair play to Mazraoui. He's had a tremendous campaign, individually, I think. So I'd go for an A. Can I say he's had a tremendous campaign because it was so crap collectively? I'm not so sure, but I'll give him an A.
Certainly did his job, fair to say. I think we can agree on that. And to be fair, I honestly, when he came in, I thought, question, probably back up, not going to play an awful lot of games, but his versatility has just been exceptional. And the way he adapted between formations as well was really impressive to see. But the final signing of Erik Ten Hag's reign was Manuel Ugarte, who came in from PSG. Wasn't Ten Hag's first choice to strengthen that midfield last summer, but it was one that rumbled on all summer long, and eventually it did get done on deadline day. Felt like more of a club signing than an Erik Ten Hag signing, of course. But again, another one where we've seen the best and the worst of him, and I don't think yet we've seen what he is truly capable of.
Yeah, I'd have to give you Ugarte a C, unfortunately. He obviously had a slow start, didn't he? And he looked off the pace. I think his best performances reserved for the cup fixtures. And he seemed to be struggling in the Premier League. Then he improved in the winter. There was some better displays. I think back to the Etihad game, obviously, when United came back and won 2-1. That was probably one of his finest matches at that stage. but he's kind of regressed, and he was dropped for the Europa League final, and that said a lot, especially considering he worked for Amram previously. So you would have expected them to have kind of struck up a really healthy relationship, and maybe Amram be fond of Ugarte quite a bit. But there are clearly doubts about whether Ugarte and Fernandes is a strong enough partnership to go forward next season. And if you're already looking at a player of Ugarte's ilk 12 months after signing him from PSG, it's not really good enough. Doesn't do him any favors, that. So yeah, I'd have him to see.
Says a lot, that, doesn't it? I think that the third summer in a row, we're looking at the need for a good, strong midfielder to come in, and they need to strike the balance between somebody of a defensive profile who can complement Fernandes, but can also sort of take the ball on the half turn and advance with it. Koimenu can do that excellently, but defensively, he's not quite that player. He is more forward thinking. We've seen him as a 10. So they do need to address this, but I think it's going to be a really tough one to try and achieve.
Yeah, he's really poor off the ball, Ugarte. His passings can really let him down. He's very wasteful. It's hard to find that player because you're basically looking at an all-rounder, especially with Fernandes in there, because you're trying to find someone who's the perfect foil for him. So it's a unique profile, really. There will be that player out there. No one instantly springs to mind, but I think they do have to sign someone in that position this summer to go forward, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been a tough one to negotiate, and a tough one to sort of find the right solution to that problem. But so that was 21 signings made under Erik ten Hag. How many of them, Steve, when you go through that list, would realistically fancy the chance of being a starter under Ruben Amorim at the start of next season? I've made a little list, and I would genuinely say probably Onana, Yoro, Martinez possibly, and then maybe Ugarte and De Ligt possibly. So I think maybe Yoro and Onana are the only ones that are absolutely guaranteed. De Ligt, Martinez, because of the competition at the back, and Ugarte, obviously, the need for a new midfielder. So not the greatest of hit rates from Ten Hag's tenure in terms of recruitment.
No, I'd agree with the players you have there. And we'll have to say as well, he spent over £400 million. And a lot of this season, when obviously Amram's been in charge since November, so he's oversaw the majority of it. But the mess he inherited and the players he inherited for the money Ten Hag spent is just, it's unbelievable, really. I mean, you look at that team and you think, where has the money gone in those cases? If Amram had been backed to that extent, or if he will be back to that extent, we might have seen something different. So yeah, a lot of money wasted. The Antony signing particularly stings because that was such a lot of money. £86 million, of course, that deal, and that was hugely disappointing. I think they're looking to get be around 32.5 million. They need to sell him for this summer to avoid making a loss on that transfer and the PSR book kind of value. So that would be interesting. But yeah, on a whole, really bad from Ten Hag, I'd say. If you were to actually grade his signings overall, you'd have to give him a D, wouldn't you? If we're using the A to D metric, yeah.
You would. It was certainly not the greatest of successful periods in terms of recruitment, but he delivered 2 trophies. George, we can't forget that.
Yeah, and the positive is he's just sold Florian Wirtz for €150 million, and he has a tendency to sign his former players. So invite Erik over and get the checkbook out, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of options for him to go for. But of the 21 he signed, 8 of them no longer at the club and 6 were loans. The only 2 permanents that are going to be no longer there are Eriksson and Evans, who are due to be released later this month. So it just goes to show that none of them, of those failures, the many we've listed, are yet to have been sold. This is going to be a challenge for United this summer, just to wrap up. And you go off the names that we've mentioned there, Stephen, and you look at the likes of Malacia, Antony, Casemiro, Højlund. You can't imagine all that many clubs are going to be queuing up to pay the big bucks that United want for them. And each and every single one of these players who do need to move on, none of them, they're probably going to make a profit on. None of them.
Yeah. I mean, Malacia will leave, of course, and that would be a small fee. He was signed for around £12 million, wasn't he? So they'll make a loss on him, I imagine, because if he's not made the grade at Feyenoord, he's probably going to have to slip down further down that division, which says a lot about him. And then Casemiro, there's not really a market for him, is there? His performances in the Europa League should help things, and his stock has improved because of that. He's only got 1 more year left on his contract, so could they try selling this summer? Hopefully they'll be trying to again, but the appropriate offer just didn't arrive last year. I fear it'll be the same, to be honest. I feel he'll be kept around the place and have another year.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of work to be done. We've discussed it countless times on this podcast in the last few weeks, and that does mark the end of this episode of the Manchester is Red podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you may get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment. The transfer window does reopen again as soon as Monday, so there should be plenty of activity going on in the coming weeks. But until then, have a great weekend, and we'll catch you again soon for another episode of the Manchester is Red podcast.